of my friends here and some of my former students, so I'm really happy and proud to be here and to be invited. You know, I was trying to figure out how to talk about this because I know some of my students have heard some of this, and pathfinding transformations, mastering a defining moment. And so what I thought I'd do is, rather than talk about one defining moment, talk about a number of defining moments, and then in that context, draw out some lessons. Some of my students have heard some of this because I want to relate to my life, and my sons are here, so I know they'll have heard some of this, but maybe really connect to it. And my defining moments are really about finding one's passion in one's lived experience, how life really decides or helps decide the rest of your life. I want to talk about it in the context of overcoming obstacles in academia, and then what I've done is connecting to a pedagogy of social activism throughout my life, and advancing social change practices through learning, teaching, and research transformations. So my survival in higher education actually has its roots in the connections between my lived experience as the immigrant son of farm workers who came from Mexico and who never really learned English. They passed away without knowing a word. Well, my father knew a few cuss words. I want to relate to that as well as the lessons learned in overcoming systemic obstacles as a community organizer, as a father, and as an intellectual activist. Whenever the road in academia got rough and I had to face another hurdle, I always remembered the difficulties that my immigrant farm worker family had to face. And in this way, the problems I encountered in academia always were smaller and more manageable. My struggles with learning English and growing up in a poor immigrant farm worker family became the foundations then later of language, labor, and immigration issues that I passionately took up in my organizing, in my teaching, in my research, and in bringing up my family as an activist intellectual. My first defining moment involved the issue of language and translation. Y como todos saben, muchas de mis clases las comenzaba en español para enseñar lo que quería decir, objeción, ¿verdad? Y si continuara a hablar por 15 minutos como estoy hablando, ¿qué pasara? ¿Qué pasara en unos 15 minutos?
Everybody would leave.
Se salieran, ¿verdad? Se enojaran. And you know, I was relating that that was an example, and in many of my classes, I would start, especially my race and ethnic relations class, I would always start my first class in Spanish, sometimes for half an hour. One year, a student got up and walked out and reported me to the president that I was being very insensitive. And I brought her back because the idea was to really maybe have students feel for a moment what a form of oppression is, and that language is a form of real power. And in my case, I spent 6 months to 8 months in a classroom in the first grade not knowing a word in English. And in my case, I just was quiet. I was mute. I would hide in a feedlot all the time. This guy, Mel Martinez, would always find me and bring me back to class. And eventually they thought something was wrong because I didn't talk. You know, I had a whole schedule when to go to the bathroom, when to eat lunch, often by myself. And eventually they sent me to the University of Colorado, and they checked my eyes, my ears, and they didn't find anything wrong with me. And luckily I had, you know, when we talk about people in our lives who you remember, her name was Mrs. Alger, and you never forget. And she was a teacher who just realized I didn't know English. And she did something that no one else did for 7 other kids in the first grade. and that was she stayed with me after school. And she pretended to want to learn Spanish. And I know she learned some Spanish. She would point to the door, and I'd say puerta, and then she would say puerta, and eventually I learned English. Later when I was at the University of Colorado, I decided to go do a study of those other 7 students who didn't graduate. That was one of my senior papers. And all of them never went, the highest level in the stratification structure of one of those 7 was truck driver. So they ended up, one was a waitress, and one ended up, working in the field still. If it hadn't been for that one teacher, it's very possible that I might not be here. So the issue here, the importance of individuals in our life. But later, my research also revealed the price that I had to pay for making it through the school system. The school system promoted me as the good old Spanish boy. So I was okay compared to those other kids, even though we lived in the barrio. And I didn't understand why the other kids just didn't like me. There's this guy, he wanted to beat me up. Never knew why he wanted to beat me up. Those who dropped out were called Mexican. And in my school, being called Mexican was a fighting word. If somebody called you Mexican, you beat them up, right? But the teachers that created a culture where being Spanish, which was more European, was acceptable, and Mexican was not. And Mexican was always those kids who brought knives and they beat up people. Unknowing to the teachers, I kept my Mexican culture, including the Spanish language, because of the persistence of my parents. They continued to emphasize that I was Mexican, that I should be proud of it, and that I should know my language. So knowledge of the Spanish language became later a means of survival for me, economically and academically. When I was in junior high school, I contributed to my family's finances by working as an interpreter in a local clothing store. In 10th grade, when everyone was required to take another language, I shined in Spanish classes and got straight A's. For the first time in my life, Euro-American students were coming and asking me for help. Believe it or not, at UCLA, in order to graduate in sociology, you had to know another language. One of the students who I started in the cohort passed every class and could not pass the Spanish language class. And I was able then to get my PhD much earlier. He had to go within a year. At the University of Colorado, so that was a defining moment. At the University of Colorado, I experienced another defining moment. I survived by connecting the classroom to social issues. While organizing on campus, I met various students who were involved in a farm worker support group on the campus. In addition to getting the Student Senate to allocate funds for the group, I was Vice President of Student Body at the time. I joined them in traveling to Center, Colorado, and joining striking lettuce workers. It also led me to make connections between the farm worker movement and the anti-war movement. For one of my classes, I wrote a paper. It was a senior paper called The Rhetoric of the Chicano Movement. It was about a 67-page paper. And I tell you, I got into that paper like nobody's business. Nobody had to tell me to do this paper. This was about me. And in looking at the persuasion strategies of leaders in the Chicano movement, I was most impressed with the strategies of Cesar Chavez. So in carrying out the research, though, I was shocked to find that the Defense Department, under the Nixon administration, was buying tons of grapes when the farm workers were on strike. These were tons and tons of grapes, and they were putting them on ships. And where were they shipping them to? Vietnam. 50% of those dying on the front lines were Black and Chicano. And so I began to question the meaning of justice. This really affected me since I had witnessed the burial of various friends who had died in the war. One of them was a young friend who I had met in 8th grade, who for 4 years in Colorado broke the state record in the mile. Actually, I went to college on a track scholarship. So him and I became good friends, and I saw him the night before he left to Vietnam. He had just come back from boot camp. And he kept saying, well, I'll be back, and I'll go to college. And I would tell Louis, yeah, you'll go to college, brother. And you know what? You'll have funds to go to college. Well, he died 2 weeks before his 19th birthday. And the next time I saw Louis, he was from a barrio named La Garra, Eden, Colorado. The next time I saw him with his family, who were also farm workers, he was being buried. So it brought forward, here farm workers are striking for bathrooms in the field. That's what Cesar was fighting for at the very beginning. And they couldn't get bathrooms in the field, and yet the Nixon administration is buying up all the graves that the workers are boycotting, and it just didn't, it didn't fit. So feeling that I could do something about these injustices, I decided to go meet Cesar Chavez. So this is the time when people are hitchhiking all across the country, and I caught a Greyhound bus. I only had $57 in my pocket and went to Delano, California. I arrived at 7 o'clock at night thinking that 40 acres was right there, and those who have gone on spring break realize that it's 3 miles out. So here I am walking at night thinking that I'm lost. And in fact, the first bar that I went to was anti-Chavez. But somebody pointed the way. And when I arrived at 40 acres, there was a huge rally going on, 1,000 people. And a lot of them were students. And Cesar Chavez said something that night that affected the rest of my life. It really made a difference. I had been accepted to law school at CU, and I hadn't applied anywhere else, and I thought that's what I'm going to do. And Cesar said, in that speech, he said, we only have one life. And in that life, there are only so many minutes, so many hours, so many weeks and months. And you have the decision now in terms of how are you going to use your life. And you can throw it away on drugs. You can throw it away on selfishness, just doing for yourself. You can throw it away on just being happy with getting material goods and making profit and stepping on other people. Or he said you can really make something out of your life. And no matter what you do, whether you become a teacher, a lawyer, an organizer, whatever you are, if you use your life in service to others when you're 50, 60, 70 years old, I can assure you that you'll look back on your life and you'll say, I really used my life well. I really used my life well. And that made me think, what I wanted to do with my life. So actually, I went back home, and that was, I guess, the third defining moment. So the second defining moment was what Cesar Chavez said. The third defining moment is when, energized by my experience with the farm workers, I returned to Alde, Colorado, a community of 1,000 people where I graduated, where I had gone, where I had grown up, and began organizing. I took my parents' garage in the back and painted it red and put a big huelga eagle on it. And everybody thought I was still Joe Calderon. My teachers had changed my name. My birth certificate was Jose Guillermo Zapata Calderon. When I graduated, my diploma read Joe William Calderon. And I really think the reason they didn't include Zapata, because it would have been sort of weird to have Joe William Shoes Calderon. So everybody thought, here's Joe, right? Good old Joe, and now he's got a degree, and he's going to do great things, and now here I am organizing to get rid of a feedlot in the middle of our body. There were 3,000 sheep in the middle of this body. We eventually were able to fight to get rid. Some people lost their houses, but we were able to win this victory, and it taught me some good lessons. But I got to tell you, the defining moment was my parents were really against it. They thought, what are you doing? We thought you were going to go, you have an education now. We thought you were going to come back and you're going to make all this money. And at a certain point, I had to remind my mom. When I was young, we used to pray to San Martin de Porres. San Martin de Porres is a black saint. He's the patron saint of the poor. And so I pulled out the little statue of San Martin de Porres and I says, Mom, you taught me. Usted me enseñó. He says, no, ¿qué por qué yo no te enseñé eso? I said, no, you taught me. You taught me that we should be with the poor and that San Martin de Porres gave us life to the poor. You taught me. And the beauty of this, why I get emotional still, start thinking about it, is then that it not only changed my mother, but it changed my father. And it's important to relate these stories. We used to know, but my teachers never understood in April why we left school and went to work in the fields. We couldn't be migrants. Because we were from Mexico. So we had to work throughout the summer from sunup to sundown like squirrels in order to save to make it during the winter. And luckily, this grocery store, Johnson's grocery store, used to let us charge to make it through the winter. Otherwise, we couldn't make it. My father in the winter would be, a day labor. Well, there would be those times when my mom would come home and we'd have the groceries and she'd pull out some milk and she'd pour the milk and I'd take a drink of the milk and it was sour. And you knew that that week you were not going to have any milk because my mom would not take the milk back. My father would not. Because we might lose that opportunity of being able to charge. Well, when I came back and then we were doing all this organizing and my mother starts to get involved in the demonstrations, my father, one day there's this defining moment not only for her but for me. I had come back from Greeley from an organizing effort. She poured me some milk and it was sour. And I sort of put it to the side, didn't say anything, it was just, that's okay, Mom, I don't. And then I saw my mom just walk out and take that milk back. Defining moment. My fourth defining moment, I owe to my wife, Rose, who is here, who taught me the deep significance of chauvinism. We'll get it together. I met Rose in the course of various campus and community educational movements. Actually, I met her when we were fighting a school as to why they wouldn't allow students to have long hair. And we were able to win the victory of having the students to have the right to have long hair. It was during this period that I had to confront my own chauvinism after we got married as it related to roles in the household. I was running around organizing all over the state and attending conferences in various parts of the nation. Rose would attend some of these conferences with me. However, when we had our first child, I tried to maintain the same schedule. But Rose was left with the primary responsibilities in the household. And at a certain point, she argued and pointed at me, if this is what the movement is all about, I want no part of it. Eventually, as our sons grew up, we developed a culture of holding family meetings and dividing up all the household work. So we all grew up helping with everything from cooking to dusting to washing dishes to sweeping and getting on their hands and knees to clean the toilets. Actually, Joaquin tells the story of what trained him for eventually working in a union 5 years after he graduated from Pitzer and now works at the UCLA Labor Center, was that he protested one day and he demanded that the family get him those covers for the face and we deal with the chemicals that we were using, right? So he began to create change and negotiated those changes. Our family roles then and our community organizing were tied to the family. When we first moved to California, we developed a parents club in the daycare our son attended. This was in Monterey Park. Subsequently, the parents club played a role in helping to elect the daycare director to our local school board. And as our sons grew older, Rose and I helped to form various multi-ethnic coalitions that actually resulted in the election of Javier Becerra, who was on the board here, and then Judy Chu, who became the mayor, and now has recently been elected to Congress. I learned, though, that just being involved together creating a division labor in the household is not enough. In our family, there were daily contradictions which arose and that we worked through. There is still a larger system out there, and a dominant culture that promotes male dominance, which treats women as sexual objects, and advances those images to our children, that tracks children into specified gender roles, and that promotes sexism and homophobia. Even our culture, I didn't understand why my father, when I was young, and I went to help my mom wash dishes, he called me a maricon, right? And real bad, he says, what you gotta do, you come out and help me chop wood, right? And so I learned, I grew up not even knowing how to make an egg, right? I didn't realize that early on, we are taught these gender roles. Certainly it was writers such as Gloria Anzaldúa who took the lead in critiquing both sexism in the dominant culture, as well as in the Chicano Latino culture. her refusal to glorify those aspects of my culture which have injured me, and which had injured me in the name of protecting me, signaled a new agenda for our communities. My fifth defining moment resulted from leaving Colorado to California. In June of 1984, I was accepted into the PhD Sociology program at UCLA. And the only reason we left after 13 years of organizing in Colorado was we were really broke. No one wanted to really hire a radical. And we were living in low-income housing, and those were struggling to getting food stamps. And so when I applied for saw this letter of a scholarship open at UCLA, the PhD program, and I had good grades in undergrad. I sent my application in, and lo and behold, June came around, and I was accepted at UCLA. So we loaded up our sons and this U-Haul that we didn't know how to back it up, so it made us go straight. And in 1988 and 1990, I complemented my organizing activities in the community of Monterey Park, where we live, by working with a 7-member local research team in a study of the politics of conflict and cooperation in Monterey Park. My research is part of studying the demographic transformations taking place in Los Angeles County, where racial minorities and new immigrants are becoming the majority, focused on the changing ethnic and class alliances between Latinos, old residents, and new Asian Pacific immigrants. The Monterey Park Research Project was a real defining moment because it brought together what I have been looking for in the academic world, a concrete connection between sociological theories and the lived experience of diverse communities in an urban setting. The project also created a space for my passion as a former immigrant, an activist, and a researcher working for social change. The experience strengthened my commitment to finish my dissertation and provided a glimpse of how I could connect the academic world with community-based participatory research, teaching, and learning. Rather than perpetuating the traditional idea that researchers should not participate in the organizations they study, the project allowed for my involvement as an organizer and researcher in the community. My data was gathered from field notes written from my lived experience as a resident in the community and from my participation in the numerous community-based organizations, and eventually resulted in a book called Politics of Diversity. I completed my graduate work with a support network that included students and work in the Chicano Studies Research Center. We organized, and with the students we shared, we socialized, we mentored to survive in the academy. We developed our own newsletter, and at one point we organized a demonstration to advocate for our rights as graduate students. To this day, I continue to have close ties with many of these friends who are now colleagues in various colleges throughout the country. One of those colleagues is Maria Solotenko, who's a professor here. In addition to these networks of support, there were various professors who took the time to mentor me, just like that first grade teacher and the other Latino and Chicano students. They encouraged me to utilize my ability to tell stories. You know, I learned to tell stories because my mom used to tell stories. That was the way she told history. She would never stop talking, right? But stories then was a basis for ethnographic research, which fit right into what I was all about. One professor saved me from drowning in a required 2-quarter statistics course by creatively integrating storytelling in his assignments. Rather than writing endless formulas from the textbooks on the board and moving ahead before we could explain our confusion, this professor connected statistical theories and formulas to data that involved compelling issues in our lives. Analyzing historical data on the death penalty taught us the meaning of longitudinal concepts. I remember the excitement I felt when he complimented me in front of my whole class for my analysis of statistical data on the economic conditions of farm workers in the United States. My sixth defining moment was when I began to teach here at Pitzer College. And I was drawn to Pitzer by its ethos of advancing intercultural and interdisciplinary understanding in the context of social responsibility. When I came here, I began to reflect on my lived experience as a farm worker and the impact that Cesar Chavez had on my life. Subsequently, I sought to develop a class that would have the same influence that the farm worker social movement had on my life. Out of this passion, and with the help of various farm worker contacts, I developed a service learning class called Rural Urban Social Movements that is now actually in its 16th, 17th year. In this class, we take students, and some of you are here, after learning about community-based organizing theories and how to apply social movement in your life, students during the spring break, rather than going drinking in Tijuana or whatever, visit the historical sites of the United Farm Workers Union in La Paz and Delano, where Cesar Chavez is buried. This is in Keene, California, and I urge all of you to go there because there's a big museum and his gravesite. The students learn about the farm worker leaders, about the history of the movement, particularly the strategies that the union has used to survive. And all I wanted to do was, I asked the question, I wonder if I could make students feel the same way I felt when I arrived in Delano. And I would say that every student that has gone, there have been over 300 or 400 students, I think their life has been influenced, and it's been a defining moment. In return, the students leave something behind. The first year, alongside Filipino-American leader Pete Velasco, the students planted 100 roses at the gravesite of Cesar Chavez. We call them the Pitzer roses. Actually, there's some right behind the row house. I urge you to go visit the farm worker garden. Those are Cesar Chavez roses. And that little sign that's there was the farm workers who gave us that sign. And the little bench there was dedicated to Brother Pete Velasco, who passed away from cancer. And when he passed away, he was so moved by the students that he asked for the Pitzer students to come and carry his casket. We took 2 van loads, and we were honored as students and faculty to carry his casket. In the following year, they helped to clean up after a flood hit the community. 5 years ago, the students carried rocks from a nearby creek to help build the foundation for the Cesar Chavez gravesite. So when you go to La Paz, they call them the Pitzer rocks, because those were rocks we carried from a creek to build that foundation. When I began a service learning project with farm workers, another opportunity for a service learning site developed, and that was with the Day Labor Center. The city of Pomona passed an ordinance that anyone caught on a corner would be fined $1,000 and 6 months in jail. One of the students here at Pitzer at that time came, and he thought that was an injustice, and came to my restructuring communities class and said, what are we going to do? And we changed the whole syllabus, sent the students to study the day laborers on every corner. There were 11 corners. This is in 1996, 97. And then we organized them and we packed City Hall. And we said, this is an injustice. And we wrote a research grant, and we got $50,000 to start that day labor center that is very much alive. One of those students who volunteered for 4 years at the Day Labor Center, Suzanne Foster, is now the director of the Day Labor Center, and we're very much alive. That student who first got me involved with the Day Laborers was Fabian Nunez, who eventually became probably the most powerful Latino in the state, the speaker in Sacramento. So flowing from these vivid examples, and by union organizers, these are examples of working alongside my family, day laborers, students, faculty, and community to develop what I call democratic spaces. Spaces maybe we can't change the entire country, we can't change the global foundations, but certainly in our homes we can start in creating the kinds of spaces of the kind of world we'd like to live in. At the Day Labor Center, we try to create spaces where people work with each other, care about each other, and use their life in service to each other. In the classroom, working in many ways to create student-centered classrooms where the voice of the students helps to lead the way, and where the teacher becomes a student and the students are teachers, and we create more equality. So if that's the kind of society that we want, then that's the kind of society that we have to try to create in the spaces that we live in, free of gender, race, class, and sexual orientation inequalities. In conclusion, these stories are examples of defining moments in my life, moments of transformation. But they connect to larger lessons learned in surviving the educational system by making learning, teaching, research, and organizing part of a lifelong commitment to advancing social change and social justice. To survive, I have found my passion for reflecting on the individual issues that affected my family from the time when I was little, and working with others and linking these issues to what other groups have faced historically, placing these issues in a larger context, and implementing strategies for change through non-traditional forms of campus and community engagement. Along the way, I have had various mentors and teachers who helped me in overcoming academic obstacles, from the support of my family and other students to various professors in graduate school who helped me make the positive connections between my activism and participatory research. From graduate school to the present, I have steadily deepened my understanding and implementation of these connections. In fact, I'm right now at a level where I'm really studying how do we not just transform nonprofit organizations, how do we transform entire cities? We now have a number of students who have graduated from Pitzer who are actually helping to run entire cities. One of those is Carlos Campos, who graduated from here, went to law school, came back. His friends decided they were going to take over Coachella, the city of Coachella, all in their 20s. They ran for office and won. And today, Carlos Campos is the city attorney in Coachella. And he was asking a similar question to other students who are working in some of these positions. And they're saying, now that we're in positions of power, now how do we transform cities? And so it's time to start studying how cities, you know, there are 100 cities throughout the country who are developing their own form of money. There are cities that are developing cooperatives, developing their own businesses where the money comes back into the community, where workers are running their own companies now. So we need a new type of thinking of how do we transform, how do we create these new spaces, and how do we use whatever knowledge we have, whether we're teachers, doctors, lawyers, in creating new spaces of equality. Through my work with the United Farmers Union and the Pomona Labor Center, I learned the importance of making a long-term commitment to a particular site and how service learning and participatory research can move beyond charity to social change and leadership empowerment. Through it all, I have survived by being proactive in both finding and creating spaces that bridge the gaps between the academic world and community-based projects for action and social change. This has included organizing not only in the community, but organizing on the campus to validate the significance of the carpentry that it takes in building such spaces. In his article, College and the Community, sociologist John Wallace provides a glimpse of what college education could be if such spaces were created, quote, with reality, with diverse disciplines, with a community of co-learners, with true self, and with purposes larger than the self, unquote. For intellectual activists, or organic intellectuals, which I consider myself, who are tenacious in constructing such spaces in higher education, the obstacles are immense. It does mean creating a balance between the personal and the political to advance ongoing educational and societal structural changes that recognize the significance of teaching and learning outside the traditional walls of academia. These are my defining moments, the lessons learned, and pathfinding transformations that I know have a larger relevance to the connections we're making between what is interdisciplinary and intercultural in the classroom and the democratic spaces we're striving to build in our community.